Hi, this is Mahrukh from Mahrukh Tariq Associates, and we are here today to discuss about inflation in 2022. I have a lot of clients asking a question about inflation and how it's going to impact our real estate market. So I have here Scott.barr with me from US Bank. And thank you, Scott, for joining us. And Scott's
Sure.
in the business for 20 plus years. So, Scott, thank you for joining us. And the big question, how does inflation impact the interest rate? And therefore, how it's going to impact real estate?
Thank you, Mayruk, for letting me join you today. I went to the grocery store the other day and I was absolutely blown away by the cost of an avocado. It was just insane.
You think
Not
it
to
may has to
mention,
do something with it's not in the season for
might
avocado,
be too.
maybe?
Yeah. But what about the chicken that I bought? I bought a whole chicken and it's up like 30% compared to what it was a year ago, you know? It just is it's amazing. And I know we're all feeling that pain right now. It's not fun. We feel it at the gas pumps, right? We
Yes.
feel it in we feel it in diapers. My daughter talks about the cost of diapers. We see it in our food prices. We see it because of supply chain issues. We hear all the time about supply chain, right? And I sometimes wonder, it's kind of like the cloud. What is the supply chain really? I mean, it's we've been used to for so long having so many things and having it so easy and having no inflation. Really, for about the last 8 to 10 years, we've had very, very little inflation, and so this is all catching, I think, most of us by complete surprise. We look at it and we say, wow, we can make more money because we the people have much more power with our employers nowadays, and we see 4.2 million people leaving their jobs in the month of November to get other jobs, more high paying jobs. Employers are paying more money. Well, guess what? They're paying more money. So people are making more money. They're now having to spend more money, right? So in many ways, where we see the average income has gone up, say 6 or 7%, right, since last year. Well, what we've seen is that inflation is up 9%. So we're not necessarily ahead at all, especially when we take into account higher taxes and everything else. So that's the background. So how does inflation impact all of this, whether it be interest rates as well as the markets? Well, inflation means we all know that if I buy an apple today for 10 cents, 10 cents, where did that number come from, right? If we buy an apple today for 50 cents and it's got 20% inflation, then that means that a year from now, that same apple that I bought for 50 cents will now be 60 cents, right? And so that's what inflation is, higher prices. How does that impact interest rates? Well, it's very simple. Interest rates are reflective of needing an investment to be worth a certain amount of money in the future. So in other words, if I, and mortgages, by the way, are bonds. So if I own a bond and I'm paying interest or I'm receiving interest, as inflation rises, I want the value of my bond or the interest that I receive to keep up with that inflation. And so interest rates have to rise. That's the first reason. The second reason is because as inflation increases, our Federal Reserve, the organization that essentially runs our banking system, is tasked by Congress to control prices. That's what they do. With their monetary policy, they control prices. And how do they do that? They do it simply by increasing or decreasing interest rates in overnight borrowing to banks. Okay. And as they do that, and you hear this all the time, right, raising or lowering the discount rate, So as interest, and I'm trying to cut this down really, but as interest rates or as inflation increases, so the Fed has to increase interest rates to try and slow the economy, to try and slow down borrowing, right? And so as inflation rises, you're going to see the Fed trying to work very hard to cut the rate of inflation, and doing so by raising interest rates. It's anticipated this year that interest rates will rise, probably from what currently in a mortgage is about 4% to up over a little bit over 5%. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, what that means is that, and you and I were talking off camera just a few minutes ago, if I'm borrowing $500,000 in the market, which is, by the way, pretty much a starter home nowadays, if I'm buying in the $500,000 range, and interest rates rise from 4 to 5%, my mortgage payment is going to be about $300 per month higher than it would have been at 4 now, because it's at 5.
And this is for the consumer who is looking a house for somewhere between 400 to 500,000 range.
Right, correct. If they're borrowing 500,000. So really, we're talking about somebody who's buying in the, say, 515 to 550 range.
Okay.
It'll be a little less, obviously, if they're buying at 400, 450. But what does that mean for that buyer? Well, now their payment is higher, right? In addition to all their other living expenses being higher. And as a result, what we are faced with is we have a buyer maybe not being able to qualify in the way in which they previously were able to do so. So that will have a tendency to slow the market, if you will, because a certain amount of people across the country and in Washington, D.C., will no longer be able to afford the house that they really wanted to buy. So we may see at that point beginning to slow down the market. Doesn't mean that prices will necessarily drop. It just means that the market will slow in terms of the activity.
So it's mean the people who at the moment can afford a starter home, which is somewhere between 450 to 550, a townhome in DMV area, they won't no longer be able to afford that 450 to 550 house, somewhere in that range. So they have to exit the market and continue either renting or go further, So
correct.
And because the people who are looking $1 million house, their budget will come down to 900 or 800, because in this market, you have to look 50,000 or 100,000 lower than what you're approved for, so you can compete against other offers. So you can.
That's exactly correct. And as we had talked about in a previous episode, about the potential for a crash, what we may not see is might not see a crash, but what we might see is a moderation of prices, because as interest rates go up, less people can afford. Therefore, what happens? Now we have a shift in the market away from this crazy seller's market, if you will, where everybody's rushing to buy. And then all of a sudden, now we have a situation where too few buyers relative to the number of homes, and now it's a buyer's market. And so we'll see prices coming back down a little bit. So we anticipate that, like everything, everything has a shift. Everything kind of goes in waves. We've seen it over time, and we don't anticipate that this will be any different. So.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Scott, for your insights. And I hope this video will help our viewers. And thank you so much for joining us today. And our information is below. If you would like to talk to Scott or me, feel free to reach out to us. We will be more than happy to help. Thank you. Thank you, Scott, for joining.
Thank you.